Hey YouTube, in this video I want to discuss a unconventional viewpoint I have on fitness, and what I'm specifically going to talk about is the difference between training for fatigue, which is the conventional approach, versus training for fluency, which is what I recommend. So what do I mean by training for fatigue? Well, I'll start with an anecdote. I went to a Muay Thai class yesterday, and like most Muay Thai classes, there was a long kind of warm-up section in the beginning. And some of the warm-up I enjoy, jump roping, jogging around, I think that's a good warm-up. But a part of the warm-ups that is pretty standard in martial arts classes that I don't like, that I don't think is useful, I think is counterproductive, is the fatiguing parts, particularly when you do stuff like push-ups or lots of like burpees or anything where you're going back and forth on some movement and doing a bunch of reps of it, some repetitive motion. And the reason I don't like these things is because they very quickly fatigue me and everybody else for that matter. Now maybe I'm soft, and obviously if I keep doing this I can do more and more of these push-ups, more and more of these things, and I'll be fatigued less as my body adapts. But for me, I didn't show up to Muay Thai class to do a bunch of push-ups. I can do a push-up anywhere. I came to Muay Thai class to practice punching and kicking, and as a physical act, as well as the cognitive skill of being able to throw those techniques and navigate a sparring situation. That's what I'm actually want to get out of my time there. So not only am I wasting time in doing these push-ups and other fatiguing exercises, I'm also wasting energy because these are fatiguing. In fact, doing 50 push-ups in a row is more fatiguing than sparring for 5 minutes. And I'm going to explain why that is at a technical, anatomical level. So when you're doing a push-up or any other what I call back and forth repetitive motion, then what you're doing is you're loading resistance on that motion. In this case, if it's a push-up, I'm putting my body weight onto my arms and then coming here, shortening one set of muscles while lengthening the others, and then flexing back and forth, back and forth. What's happening here is I have a continuous load on these muscles, and I'm going back and forth, but because it's a back and forth motion, I'm not going to the full length of the cycle as I would in a cyclic repetitive motion. I'll explain what that is in a moment. But in these back and forth repetitive motions, I'm very quickly fatiguing. I'm not using the full length of my muscle tissue in most cases, and because it's continuous resistance, I'm fatiguing. And even deeper than that, as I fatigue, eventually I get to a failure point. I get to a point where my muscles are so tired that in order for me to eke out more push-ups, I have to compromise my structure a bit. And then what will happen is that the weakest links in my body network will give out, and then it'll load disproportionately on the remaining links. And then those links will get fatigued even faster, and then more of those fall out even more, and then the whole thing collapses. So in the end, I'm giving a disproportionate amount of work to those parts of my body that actually don't need work. The parts of my body that need work are those parts that fail first, that fatigue fastest. So I'm creating imbalance. So all these things are happening, and then again, I now just blew my energy load in the first 15 minutes of class, so I won't be able to be as focused and give as much energy to my sparring, to my technique. But again, this is standard practice when you go to martial arts things, because it's conventional thought that, oh, we should just do these repetitive back and forth motions to get ourselves in shape. Now, let's talk a bit about training for fluency. So as I'll keep elaborating in this channel, body fluency refers to two things: the cognitive ability to navigate and visualize and affect your network of bones and soft tissue fibers that make movement and standing up possible. And it's also a physical attribute. It's a measure of how well mechanical tension can flow through that network of bone and tissue. And in this system of body fluency, what we're doing is we're developing our cognitive ability to improve our body network and get it more and more fluent. Now, when I'm in a Muay Thai class, the way I apply that is I'm trying to throw this roundhouse kick, and in me getting the technique, I'm not just practicing the motor skill, I'm also trying to figure out where I'm blocked in my body network, which muscles I need to open up or connect to get that kick to flow more. So it's actually a very, very good use of my time to practice technique and throw kicks, because I'm not just developing the motor skill, but also opening up my fluency. And it's way more fun and way more engaging mentally. And it also does not drain as much physical energy. And here's why. Because when you throw a punch or you throw a kick, we'll take two scenarios. Shadow boxing, I'm just kind of throwing into the air, or hitting a bag or hitting pads or an opponent, where I'm making a shock impact with something. They're slightly different, but in both cases, the actual moment of exertion is actually a single moment. So I throw the punch. If I'm throwing this punch right here, there's a beginning moment where I accelerate my muscles, my bones. So I go, bah, and I contract things and throw it. And then if I'm hitting an object, there's another thing where I'm contracting my whole body to absorb that impact and have a nice bounce back. And so really, if I'm hitting an object, there's only 2 moments of exertion, and then I have this kind of glide space in between. So pop, pop. Those are my 2 moments of exertion. Contrast this to doing a push-up, where I have this continuous exertion. And if there's a gas tank, metaphorical gas tank, it's gonna drain way quicker. Also, when you talk about gas, not just kind of my general kind of cardio, but also just in those muscles that are weak links, they're contracting, and then eventually just like lactic acid buildup or whatever happens that actually triggers a muscle failure. Whereas here, pop, pop, I can throw punches, and because it's quick pop, pops, I'm not gonna get that same effect. It's gonna take a lot longer for me to be so tired in my body that my muscles are so sore that when I throw that punch, I can't even throw it anymore. And another reason for that is because when I throw punches and throw kicks, I'm using my entire body. Whereas when we're doing these push-ups or whatever, I tend to kind of load just one section of my body instead of the whole thing. So throwing punches and kicks on bags, on opponents, and sparring, this is something that both you can get way more mileage out of in terms of how long you can do it and get benefits, and you get way more fluency out of it. You're developing both your cognitive fluency as you improve your technique, improve your sparring capacity and adaptation to the arena, and you are improving your physical fluency by opening things up with these throwing and swinging motions, as opposed to these stiffening, tight kind of push-up motions where we're just wasting so much energy on. So that's the main point I want to put across, is that when you're thinking about working out, when I go to the gym, independent of a Muay Thai class where I'm focusing on a skill, if I'm going to the gym, I'm just exercising for my body. I basically never rep to fatigue. I never rep to failure. I'm basically just repping for fluency. I'll do a movement, grab a weight, swing it around, grab a cable machine, throw some balls, slam things around. But every movement I'm doing it as a way to kind of test my body and see where my weak points are, and then connect those, make myself more fluent. So when I walk out of there, I'm actually more invigorated and more energized than when I walked in, and that makes me want to walk back in again later. Now, one caveat I'll make to this argument is the value of training through fatigue as more of a, there's a metabolic function, but I think more of a psychological function. So for example, if you are preparing for a fight, you need to be able to defend yourself and attack while you're completely drained and fatigued, right? So one way to do that might be to do a bunch of push-ups and a bunch of jumping jacks and exercise bike and a bunch of other non-fight related movements to tire yourself out, and then get into the arena and start boxing, start striking. And because you're so fatigued, now you're developing these kind of more emotional toughness and psychological tools to continue to actually fight in that compromised situation of fatigue and drain. But still, I would argue that a better way to fatigue yourself is just to throw a bunch of punches and kicks on the bag, or keep sparring with partners and fatigue yourself through the actual activity rather than fatiguing yourself through a bunch of arbitrary back and forth movements. Because again, you're actually improving your fluency, and you're actually more simulating the way you're going to get tired in a fight anyways. You're not going to bust out a bunch of push-ups in the middle of a fight, right? So that's the main points I want to make here. Another final point, just because I have an open loop in my head, is I'll quickly mention the difference between what I call a back and forth, or I call oscillating repetition, versus a cycling or round and round repetition. I'll make another video on this to go more elaborate, but just to kind of show you, if I'm doing push-ups back and forth, or pull-ups up and down, or I'm grabbing a dumbbell up and down, these are back and forth movements, repetitive movements, and they're very different from a cyclic repetitive movement, the quintessential which being walking, jogging, and running. So right now, just my upper body's doing it, but this movement right here, I'm doing with my arms. I'm doing the same movement over and over again, but I'm actually doing a cycle. If you look at my right arm here, it comes to the end range, and then instead of coming back the way it came, it actually cycles around a muscle circuit, and then comes back, and it cycles around again. And this difference makes a massive difference in terms of your fatiguing, because what will happen is when I'm just doing a back and forth, I'll tend to stay in not the full range, a short range. So I'm only using part of the tissue, which will develop the rest of the tissue poorly. When I do this, I come to the full end range, and then I change course, and then I get a recoil and come in, which gives me energy efficiency, and then I cycle back. So when you do these motions, you can do them for way longer before you fatigue and fail than if you do a back and forth kind of motion. So I'll make another video on this because I think it's a very important distinction people need to make when it comes to their exercise and workouts. You want to be doing way more cyclic repetition. If you're going to be repetitive motion, you want to make it cyclic. And you can train back and forth. There is a purpose for that, but even then there's a nuance to how you can do that. I'll talk about later. But the conventional approach, like 90% of what people do in the gym, are just these back and forth, within 70% of their actual full muscle length, and they're going back and forth. Those end ranges of their tissue are getting dehydrated and unused, and fascia is wrapping around it. So it's actually adding to the blockages in your body network and reducing your fluency and mobility. Whereas these cyclic ones, you can keep going, and it greases and lubricates the whole body the way it's meant to be used. One final point I'll make on this actually is that I like to always cross-reference with like evolutionary first principles. And what I mean by that is like, this body came about in an environment along with all the other animals in this world. So the principles that make my body thrive shouldn't be that different, if at all, from the principles that make a cat thrive, or a dog thrive, or a bear, or an eagle, or whatever. And you'll notice in the animal kingdom, you basically never see an animal go back and forth like this. It's not what they do, right? They're running, and they're swinging, and they're like flying, and all these other kind of cyclic motions. But this kind of back and forth thing, this is a human construct. It's a cultural construct, and a rather recent one, because most of what people did for exercise before was actual activity, like wrestling and fighting and running and jumping and stuff. So this kind of like, let's go to the gym, grab this industrial made like barbell, and go back and forth on like this as our workout until our muscles and they just like literally fail. That's another thing. Like, animals would never go to failure in the wild, because if you fail in the wild, you're gonna die, right? So just kind of thinking first principles a bit about how we train. Why are we intentionally fatiguing and failing? Why are we doing these awkward back and forth movements? What could we do that would be more conducive to our longevity, to our performance, to our fluency, to all the good things in life? So hopefully that video made sense. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you like this kind of content, like, subscribe. I'm going to be putting out more videos talking about my unconventional view on fitness in the future.